Hello everyone. Hope you are all sitting comfortably under a mid-October night. Being wanted to give you all a little history lesson for the season of Halloween. It involves werewolves and Jews. No, don't worry, this won't be about some sort of 80s schlock horror film where SS soldiers are mutilated by werewolves that happen to have been Jewish when they were human, although the Nazis would have definitely deserved such a fate to happen to them. Bean wants to instead talk about Kurt Siodmak. Hopefully I didn't butcher that. I tried to pronounce that as best as being could. His name is originally spelt with a K, however later it's spelled with a C. He was a novelist and a screenwriter. Born in Dresden, Germany in 1902 to parents who both belonged to Jewish families, he would spend the first 30 years of his life here, becoming a German novelist and screenwriter. A notable novel he wrote and published in Germany was FP1, which was about a fictional Atlantic Ocean airstrip that aids intercontinental flights that need to be refueled between America and Europe, which some people secretly plot to destroy. It was published in 1931 and then made into a film adaptation the following year in 1932, which he was also one of the screenplay writers for. However, he would not spend the rest of his life in Germany, as sometime later he would immigrate to England to continue working in film, after hearing an anti-Semitic tirade from Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. Let's fast forward a bit. He moved to America in 1937 to become a screenwriter for American films as he did for British and German films before. Of the many American films, those relevant to this video are his screenplays concerning Universal monster films, such as the 1940 films The Invisible Man Returns and The Invisible Woman. However, this video is not about the Invisible Man or Woman, rather it concerns the screenplay he wrote for a film that following year in 1941. A little story for a totally obscure film, The Wolfman. For those unaware, this film defined the iconic werewolf for the modern film-going audience, as did 1931's Dracula for vampires a decade earlier, and George A. Romero's 1968 film, Night of the Living Dead, would do for zombies decades later. The film and its sequels had many tropes in them that are regarded today as fundamental to the werewolf legend, but their use was actually tied to Siodmak's history of evading Nazi persecution rather than older folklore. Before we continue, let's establish some film history and a few other things. Being's aware that the film isn't the first werewolf movie. The Werewolf 1913 is usually credited with that. Based off of a few summaries Being could find for the film, it's about a Navajo woman who mistakenly believes her husband to have abandoned her when actually he was murdered. But she then learns to become a witch and then teaches her daughter about witchcraft, and then her daughter uses those abilities to become a wolf and then goes in wolf form to kill a bunch of settler colonialists. Which sounds pretty cool. It would have been great to see the first werewolf movie have an explicit anti-colonialist message. Although we don't actually know how this all plays out and how this is all executed, so it could actually be pretty racist, but we don't know because the film is considered lost due to a supposed fire at Universal Studios, which films back then were printed on very flammable materials, so it is possible. And the earliest surviving werewolf movie that Being could find is a 1925 film called Wolfblood, A Tale of the Forest. In it, a guy dreams of running with a pack of phantom wolves after undergoing a blood transfusion where they use wolf's blood. The other parts of the film are about a logging company, and the main guy has a feud with somebody else, and there's a romance, I think. Being doesn't care, let's move on. Of course, we can't forget 1935's Werewolf of London, which was the first mainstream werewolf Hollywood film. This one has an actual bipedal wolf dude, and even the full moon is involved, which is about Wilfred, a wealthy English botanist that goes to Tibet to search for a rare plant he's researching which takes its strength from the moon. While there, he's attacked by a werewolf during a full moon, but survives this encounter, and takes a rare specimen of the plant he was researching with him back to London, where he then turns into a werewolf that following full moon. Now back to 1941, The Wolfman. To quickly summarize the film, it's about the everyman, Larry Talbot, played by Lon Chaney Jr., son of Lon Chaney, the man of 1,000 faces, which Wikipedia goes on to say, when summarizing the film, he returns to his ancestral home in Llewellyn Wells to bury his recently deceased brother and reconcile with his estranged father. Also, of course, Larry goes on to spy on a woman using a big telescope in his father's estate while she runs an antique store, and then blah blah, skip Larry being a total creep at that antique store. Larry is a big ol' 6'2" awkward weirdo.
What I'm really looking for is something half-moon shaped with spangles on it, golden.
Oh, I'm sorry. We haven't any like that just now.
Oh, yes, you have. Don't you remember? On your dressing table up in your room.
Some more stuff, skip the use of the Romani slurs, and here, he gets bitten by a wolf. Bean wants to now go through a few of these classic tropes and uncover their connection to Jewish persecution and wrap them all together in a Gothic humanist analysis. We could start with the most iconic of tropes, the full moon. Actually, in the film, a full moon isn't required for a werewolf to transform, just an autumn moon, as expressed in the original poem invented by Siadmak. Even a man who is pure at heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. Of course, in the sequel, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. This last part, and the autumn moon is bright, is changed to, and the full moon is bright. For Siadmak, the moon represented the Nazi swastika, as the light of Nazi propaganda that bathed over Germany had seemingly turned Jews into monsters in the eyes of many. To quote Siadmak himself, in a 1999 interview for the Writers Guild of America, for which he was a founding member, "I am the Wolfman. I was cursed into a fate I didn't want, to be a Jew in Germany. The swastika represents the moon. When the moon comes up, the man doesn't want to murder, but he knows he cannot escape it. The Wolfman destiny." The Jewish people didn't want to be considered monsters, but the Nazis' hatred for them had otherized them into non-human creatures, even turning the Star of David into a mark of death, as the Nazis would force Jewish people to wear a yellow Star of David with the word Jew written on it in public at all times to first segregate the Jewish populace, and then ultimately slaughter them en masse. In the film, the pentagram, rather than the Star of David, is used as the mark of death on those who had been cursed with lycanthropy, as well as marking the werewolf's next victims.
What's this pentagram business?
Well, every werewolf is marked with that and sees it in the palm of his next victim's hand.
Even silver, which is used as the iconic weakness for the werewolf, is a reference to the stereotypes surrounding Jews as hoarders of wealth, particularly that of precious metals such as gold and silver. Back in biblical times, many Jews were gold and silver smiths who often used their talents to craft artifacts for religious and cultural ceremonies. The Nazis plundered the treasures of the people they targeted, and Jews were no exception. The metallic substances used for cultural and religious activities were now used against them as a symbol for their supposed greed.
A werewolf can be killed only with a silver bullet, or a silver knife,
Or a stick.
with a silver handle.
This Wolfman's destiny that Siadmak mentioned seems to mean that one is cursed to run until you can't anymore, and sooner or later, you'll be forced to fight back and murder your oppressor, becoming the Wolfman. It's easy to interpret this as the werewolf as another anti-Jewish character, but not in Being's eyes. In a Gothic humanist analysis, you could take this as, you've made me a monster in order to take away my humanity, but you failed to consider what would happen if I embraced that monster, to transform bigotry's other into a symbol of strength, to take this monstrous non-human curse you've placed upon me, and use it to fight back for my humanity against your inhuman cruelties. This tale may have started with victimization, but it ends with self-emancipation. Being wants to mention one last thing. Not only does the Wolfman carry with it the horrors of the Holocaust, but the film itself could be read as a broader reflection on the confusion felt by everyone during the turbulent times of the Second World War. That universal monster movie trope of having both a blend of modern and ancient in its environment, where the viewer never quite knows exactly when the film takes place. The modern clothes and car that Chaney's character has exists alongside the backdrop of horse-drawn wagons and old European architecture. One can't help but interpret this as a reflection of the confusion that weighed on the world as it was thrown into unprecedented violence and conflict. The world's war machines raging across the European continent. Battles fought with 20th century weaponry as soldiers are surrounded by the atmosphere of previous centuries. It was as if time itself was folding in, waiting for those victorious to come out and start it all anew again. This may be appearing to be overthinking, but any American who saw The Wolfman at the time of its release was undoubtedly concerned about the state of the world, as Pearl Harbor had just occurred only 5 days before the film's release. Now Bing leaves you with a spooky farewell.
There are two kinds of people in this world. Those who believe, and those who will.
Remember to stay tuned for later this month, boys and girls, for a showing of Swastika Moon.
Swimming with the werewolf, this is a totally real song.
On the Being Channel.